Hi, my name's Ian Puddick. People know me online because I was involved in a huge police operation called Operation Bohan by the Counter-Terrorism Police. I won every single case. The police abused me in custody. I was brutalised. The CCTV was wiped. And I made a huge fuss about it and tried to hold every single officer to account, including the police commissioner. During that time, I met David Shayler. And David Shayler is a former MI5 officer. We became very good friends. He stayed with me here at my office for quite a period of time. Unfortunately, that was a joke. So we're going to do an interview with David Shayler, and it's about life inside MI5. Now, obviously, there are restrictions, the Official Secrets Act, etc. So we're not going to breach the Official Secrets Act. David wrote a book that the government initially tried to ban called Spies, Lies and Whistleblowers. And it was eventually republished with some redactions. I did actually find out what the redactions were, and it's very interesting. So I'm going to do something I've never done before, and I probably, hopefully, will never do again. David has had a very difficult time. I'm not going to say any more than that. You can watch the interviews and you can make up your own mind what kind of lifestyle David has had to have, unfortunately, because of how he's been treated. So none of my YouTube channel, some of my videos have had 1.5 million views. My YouTube channel is not monetized. None of my videos are monetized. I don't make 1p from YouTube, and my plans are never to do that. However, this one video, there will be a link under the video for donations at your discretion, and every single penny will go to my good friend David Shayler. As I said, you can make up your mind. You listen to what David's got to say, listen to what's happened to him. He's a good man, he's an honest man. He told the truth and was destroyed for it. Well, not totally destroyed. So that's my introduction, and I look forward to speaking to David. So David, so when the Lockerbie plane crash happened, obviously in Lockerbie, Scotland, so you've got the local police investigating it. Were the Met involved at all?
Yeah, the Met were involved.
Met were involved.
Yeah.
And then you've got MI5, so you've got 3 separate investigations. And did they all work together seamlessly?
Well, this is an interesting question, because with Lockerbie there was a lot of cooperation.
Okay, because you were in charge of that investigation for MI5, weren't you?
Not the original investigation. Obviously, what happened was once the plane's gone down, there were 2 investigations. One's done by the counter-terrorist police, and one is done by experts, what's called an air crash investigation.
Okay, and when you say counter-terrorism police, is that local counter-terrorism up in Scotland, or is that counter-terrorism Met?
Well, the the Dumfries and Galloway police were in charge. The Met were helping them as experts in terrorism, as were MI5. And there were also, obviously, the American services were all trying to get their tuppence for things. It was an American plane, lots of American personnel on board, which has caused all sorts of conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
There's even been a conspiracy theory when the FBI's forensic officer was exposed as a fraud. They said, oh, the Lockerbie evidence is not good, but it was never forensicated in the US, it's forensicated in Scotland. But that gives you an idea of how they've tried to undermine the Lockerbie evidence all the way through. Now, obviously, when the Lockerbie attack happened...
When you say they, you mean the Americans?
Yeah. Well, I would say the people above government.
Okay.
Not the Americans, not the British, the people above them.
Me.
So yeah, when the Lockerbie attack happened, I was still at university, basically. It was from 88. But I was cutting my teeth in journalism, so I did take an interest in the case. And as it unfolded, there was all this press coverage about perhaps Syria was responsible, or Iran, or the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine General Command. All these groups were being fingered, Palestinians or whatever.
Sounds like a Monty Python sketch.
Well, it's
People's Front of Judea.
all that stuff, yeah, that's all absolutely true with the Middle East as well as with the left, yeah. But the whole investigation changed. This is obviously before I joined. The whole investigation turned when they discovered some fragments from the bomb suitcase, stuff that had been exploded, showing the signs of having been near an explosion but wasn't completely destroyed. And what they had was the serial number of a manufacturer of a pair of trousers. So they managed to find out who the manufacturer was in Malta, got the serial numbers of the clothes to them, and they said, well, we only sold these batch of clothes to this particular shop, owned by a guy called Tony Gauci in Valletta. Now, when the police went in to investigate, what happened was Dumfries and Galloway police were doing this with the assistance of Malta, the Maltese police, and they went in to interview the guy in the shop, and he said to them he wasn't a Palestinian, he was a Libyan. And that what changed the whole investigation. And obviously he'd known Malta being off the coast of Libya. And he gave one other piece of information as well. He said, the funny thing was, he said this guy, when he was buying things, he didn't seem to have any theme to it. He bought a baby grow, he bought this, the homemade jacket. He was just randomly buying things. And then they said, oh yeah, and he randomly brought an umbrella. And at this point, there hadn't been an umbrella forensicated. But when they went back and said, look, when you're looking at stuff, prioritise umbrellas, sure enough, they find an umbrella, forensicated it, it's for the bomb suitcase, basically. So clearly, we've got an idea that the operation was taking place in Malta and not, as had been previously thought, in Frankfurt. Because there'd been arrest of a cell of the PFLP-GC in an operation called Autumn Leaves about 2 months before Lockerbie. And therefore, because they'd found the bomb maker, they'd accounted for 4 out of the 5 bombs he put in cassette recorders, and the 5th one couldn't be accounted for. So they was all thinking, well, that's the one that blew up over Lockerbie.
Yeah.
However, there were strategic differences. The bombs that were made by this guy called Cresat for the PFLP-GC had what were called barometric timers. They only go off at a certain air pressure. Whereas we know that the timer in Lockerbie was a straight set time. You set it off and it goes off that many hours later. So that clearly showed that it wasn't actually the PFLP-GC, it was coming from somewhere else. When they started to make further inquiries at Malta, they had witnesses and things like this to the 2 Libyans being involved. A piece of luggage being transferred from a flight out of Malta from Frankfurt onto the flight PA-103, which then went to London and was then blown up over Lockerbie.
How many people are on this investigation? It sounds huge.
Oh, it was huge, yeah, it was all I'm saying. Yeah, absolutely mad.
To get that level of detail.
Yeah. Well, the thing about Lockerbie is it was the biggest terrorist attack in history until 9/11 in terms of fatalities. It was massive, absolutely massive. And they say they'd also do a thing called an air crash investigation. And the reason I know this is because I went back to see the reconstructed plane in a hangar. So you've got the whole body of the plane, they've got most of it, there's a gap still, not much of the wings left, but nevertheless little bits of them. And I actually walked in that plane, I saw that reconstruction. Those do not exist for any of the planes on 9/11, basically. And that's the beginning of questioning 9/11. Why are there not these public inquiries? They're all public inquiries.
Yeah, no.
So that happened there. So I knew about Lockerbie, I should have been those sort of inquiries.
George Galloway had, we're not going to talk about 9/11, but George Galloway had Richard Gage from the 9/11 group. It's incredible.
Yeah, no, and he's quite low level. Yeah, I'm
really.
Up there compared to it, basically, with this stuff. I mean, I say, it's just, anyway, you scratch
incredible stuff.
I'll just say this now, as a former counter-terrorist officer, I'm in a better position to be able to judge 9/11 than most. And I will tell you that none of that investigation stands up to any kind of scrutiny.
Just listening to Richard Gage, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense.
There's no forensics.
You don't need to be a conspiracy theorist. It's just intelligent.
It's physics, it's science, basically. Yeah. And any basic knowledge of intelligence. So anyway, we had this whole situation with the Lockerbie thing. So by the time I got posted to the section in 1994, 2 Libyans had been indicted by the US, Abdul Basit Fima and al-Megrahi, who was subsequently convicted. Now, obviously, part of my job was not just to maintain the sanctity of the evidence, because I was saying there were these dark forces who were trying to undermine the official account, as in the evidence gathered by police.
How are they doing that?
Well, they were briefing the media. And this is where I found out about something called information operations. MI6 has a section devoted to planting up made-up stories in the media. And those made-up stories, of course, are supposed to represent...
And just so that, obviously, we're in the world of conspiracy now. I know we're not, but bear with me. There is, the name's just gone, but there's a really interesting interview with a former CIA officer who reiterates basically what you've just said, and he gives detailed accounts of how the CIA and MI6 would plant false stories in the media to position whatever things were happening, and obviously condition the public to a narrative that was going to come out. Really interesting. Really interesting. Sorry, mate, carry on.
But that was why there were so many conspiracy theories about Lockerbie. Obviously, I read these before I joined the service. So the first thing I did when I got in there with the Lockerbie files, I went through all MI5's Lockerbie files to see if there was a conspiracy going on, and there wasn't. The story was true. But what I found out was the conspiracy theories were coming from MI6. MI6 was, particularly with Iran, was planting stories. What generally happened is, they plant in the Sunday papers, because there's no news on Saturday, so the Sunday papers need something. They plant in the Sunday newspapers. I get them Monday mornings, there's Sunday papers there with these Lockerbie articles cut out saying your response. So I spend every Monday morning just rebutting all the crap in these articles, basically. Now, obviously, I thought that the whole MI6 thing with the relationship with the media was like an old boys' network. It was informal, but it's not. It's formal.
Yeah, it's very formal.
And I actually found out a story where they'd actually been caught. Well, they got caught because of me. They planted a made-up story about Col Gadaffi's son working with Iran and counterfeiting Iranian money. And this story was purely...
He sued them, didn't he? He sued them.
Yeah, he sued them and won.
He sued the Telegraph, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right.
Telegraph.
With Dominic Lawson and Con Cochran,
Yeah.
both pretty much MI6 assets. Well, the Americans would call them. We call them agents, but assets of MI6. They're not journalists trying to get the truth. They just sit there being spoon-fed by MI6. They can't question it because they won't get spoon-fed again.
Yeah.
So people like Con Cochran have made an entire career on putting forward misinformation on behalf of the intelligence services in our media, basically.
Colonel Gadaffi owes me £1,000, and that's not a joke. Yeah. He genuinely owes me £1,000. Yeah. Owes me £1,000. We did some work for him at his London house.
Just hasn't paid.
Yeah, well, the Americans killed him, but.
So, good now. But so it was interesting.
Not many people can say that.
Yeah. So obviously one of the aspects of working on the Lockerbie thing was trying to maintain the sanctity of the investigation and the evidence because we were being hit from all angles. There was even a PR company set up called GJW International involving the former Liberal leader David Steele. They were being paid a fortune by the Libyan government to try and undermine it. There was a documentary called The Maltese Double Cross. This is what happens though, if it's in the interests of the elite, because they want to go into Iran to blame Iran, they will get all the stops out to make sure that people think it's Iran.
Yeah.
But I stood my ground and said, no, it's not the case, we've got good evidence against these two Libyans. And obviously, when it came to, let's just go through first, obviously the problem was getting them over for trial, that was the other issue. And this is where we got a great coup at the expense of MI6, because what happened was, I somehow came across the name of one of our agents. You're not supposed to know, obviously, but sometimes you just work it out. You can just work it out. So by 1994, the problem for the intelligence services was getting the two Libyans who'd been charged with the Lockerbie attack over to Scotland for trial. And it was proposed at the time that there should be some kind of third country arrangement, because Gaddafi argued they wouldn't get a fair trial in Scotland, these two people. And not much happened with that. And the Conservative government, I would say, had no will to see those people on trial whatsoever. However, what we did do was open up a back channel with the Libyan government. I discovered one of our agents had particularly good access to someone who was in the right position to be able to make that decision. Now, it didn't happen when I was in the service, but I did see that when the reports happened when they were handed over, the Libyan who'd been in the go-between was named. And so he'd been an MI5 agent, and I recognised the name. So I realised that the work I began with somebody in the service subsequently got those two people over to The Hague in the Netherlands as a third country neutral trial. Now, obviously at trial, one was convicted and one was acquitted. Fim was acquitted on a technicality. In front of a jury, he would have been convicted, basically, but Abdul Basit Maghali was convicted. There was evidence against other people in the Libyan External Security Organisation.
How high did that go?
To the head of the organisation, but didn't go to Gaddafi himself. So we don't know whether the intelligence services carried it out without his knowledge, so he could deny it on the world stage. We don't know that. But there was compelling evidence against the Libyans that MI6 ignored, that the elite ignored, to try and blame Iran, because it's always been their business to want to go into Iran, as we see to the present day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm trying to think of the general that made the video that you see online saying about when he got, I see his face and his name's just gone, but he says, when he went into the Pentagon.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, he says, we're planning to take out all of these countries with Iran and Syria and all of the rest of them, and this plan. And he said, why? And the guys at the Pentagon said, I don't know, it's just that we've got a great army and we can take countries down. I think they're his exact words, by the way.
there is the theory as well, they were all countries that didn't have a Rothschild-controlled central bank. That was the theory.
Any more thoughts to add on Lockerbie?
Well, I'd say Lockerbie was a good example where you've got a lot of different police forces across the world cooperating to try and...
Cooperating well.
Yeah. But at the same time, you had MI6 and their friends in government trying to undermine that, and in the media trying to undermine that.
Because they wanted to blame Iran.
Yeah. So that just shows you how crazy it is. Even where you get good cooperation amongst the services, doing the actual investigating and bringing in the evidence and intelligence, you also get the MI6 trying to undermine that.
Yeah.
And again, there's no reason for this, for reasons of justice, resources, of course, you're wasting your resources going to the wrong place. But it just shows how MI6 is a law unto itself and what enormous influence it has over certain government ministers.
Interesting. Thank you. David, thanks for sharing that.